The skiff kept to the shadow that lay under the quayside, its oars whispering instead of splashing, a moth's wing rather than a gull's cry. A cloak of fish stench and pitch smoke lay over the river, and in that cloak a small figure tried to breathe like someone who belonged to the docks. Shallow, with the patience of a net set overnight. She had learned waiting from cold hedgerows and from a man who had called himself no one, and the river was another kind of hedge, a black moving thicket that hid and revealed by inches. Her fingers, creased by brine, were curled around the gunwale. Her other hand kept finding the sliver of steel sewn into the seam of her jerkin the way a tongue seeks the edge of a chipped tooth. There were many ways to enter a city and even more ways to be carried out of one, and she had the feel of both in her bones. Lanterns swung on the far quay like low moons that could not make up their minds. The watchmen posted along the dock moved in slow loops, bored and loud in the wrong places. Once, a helmet flashed polished as a fish scale. Once, a voice called a joke toward the night, and the night did not answer. Toward the center of the river, the water held a pale smear of reflected sky. Nearer the bank, tar and wine and dead eel leached into the current so it looked like spilled ink. She let her breath match the boatman's strokes to quiet her chest. The boatman had not asked questions beyond a price. Gold, even small, quieted suspicion, and she had learned how to fold speech into stillness until people did not see her mouth. "You'll set down here," the man whispered, more to the river than to her. "Go with the baskets when they go. You're small enough to be a basket, if someone has no apples left." She nodded, and he did not see in the dark. The quay came up like a wall, then it was a shelf, then a wet ladder of moss-hung stones, and she climbed with the balance that comes to children who have run rooftops and rafters as often as lanes. Above, a warehouse yawned. The double doors hung open just enough to show the glow of tallow. Within were mounds upon mounds of what would be turned into stews and bribes and courage. Sacks of barley, onions stacked like soldiers with their heads shaved, barrels sealed and daubed with a sign she had learned in whispers. The green tear that meant fire in a bottle, not to be shaken or sung to. The smell of that sign was wrong and right at once. It had the sweetness of an orchard left too long, and under that a sharpness that pricked the nose and the memory. She let her eyes slide across the barrels as if they were blots of water in which faces might appear. She had seen the faces of men who feared fire and those who loved to feed it. She knew that in the keep above, someone had ordered this. Someone had thought a river could be made into a trap, that oil and sorcery could turn a tide, that someone was not the one she had come for, but he would do as a stepping stone if he wandered underfoot. She became a shadow of bales, a knot in a rope, the makeshift child that every dock gathers on its ledges, the kind that keeps out of reach, learns the rhythm of curses, and knows to look at boots rather than eyes. When a man with onion skin hands shouldered through, she followed his wake as a minnow follows a carp. When he lifted baskets, she ducked under the first and took the second and staggered believably under the weight of fruit. No one wanted to see children when fear hung over the city like a damp cloak. They let her pass. They told her to hurry out of the way. The open door let in a gust that smelled of the sea beyond the river. Salt, distance, the bite of raw wind. She stepped out onto stone and mixed herself with a line of others carrying what they had for a kitchen that would boil and chop and ladle until the city sank or did not. A woman with raw wrists hooked with onions took pity on a waif and made the mistake of thinking two hands better than one. The waif smiled and lowered her eyes and obeyed. The climb up the hill to the keep taught her the slope of the city's heart. Streets tightened under her feet and then released. Houses leaned together as if whispering treachery into each other's shutters. At a corner, a group of boys were baiting a chained dog with a fish head, all nerves masked as boldness. The dog saw her as she went by and went silent. In a side court, a priestess in red stood with her face tilted up like a flower-seeking sun, though the sky was iron and blank. She had seen that color at a crossroads once, and the memory stirred like a sleeping fox. The gates of the Red Keep were not meant for children unless they belonged to a lord or a baker. But kitchens take what they can, and fear takes more. In the press, she became invisible. The onion's wrist woman, whose name was nothing she needed, spoke to a guard with the tone of one who has worked since before dawn. The guard's eyes slid past the extra basket and the small figure bent under it. The small figure had learned how to weigh herself with weariness, to grow a limp for the length of a doorway and discard it like a peel. Her face was a smudge of ash where freckles might have been. The kitchen was a world. Heat, the skin-tightening kind you get from standing too near 10 fires with 10 different tempers, lay over everything. Cooks moved in a pattern that would have cut any large person into pieces. Knives made a sound like sleet. Chickens dangled upside down and dripped in rhythms. The wash boys flung pale water that steamed on the floor and hid knives in it. A cat, dry-eyed and disdainful, threaded between spilled flour and heel crumbs and scalded its whiskers against a pot and did not flinch. A voice might have been a woman's if it had not been honed into a blade years ago beat out commands. Another voice, certain of titles and not of onions, called for something and was ignored. By the second hour she had a place. Not a true place, but a handhold on a rope. The onion-wrist woman told her to fetch and carry and not eat more than would keep her feet under her, and she obeyed and learned. Where water was drawn, where wine was watered, where small pantry doors stood open for the width of an eye, there was a narrow stair where wind moaned like a tethered horse. There was a corner where soot lay deeper than the wall itself, and if you pressed your ear to it you could hear the clack of tile work above. Footsteps wrapped in fabric in the corridor called the womb by servants who were braver than they thought. She did not yet know which corridors would be closed when fear grew teeth. She did not yet know how the queen walked when she drank and when she did not. A day can be longer than a winter if you put enough work into it. The city made its minutes into loaves with gritty bread and kept breaking them. Rumor walked faster than water. It said ships like teeth were biting up the bay. It said the Lord of Dragonstone wore the sea as armor, that he slept standing and had no song. It said the king would watch from the walls with a sword that had not tasted anything but air. It said the hand had a nose for powder and set chains where fish used to run. It said a wizard had been seen slipping into a cellar with a cage of snakes. She sifted rumor the way you sift flour, by letting the big worthless husks be blown aside and keeping the fine part that would rise in hot air. At dusk, as the day held its breath, she saw her sister and did not let her breath show it. The girl was escorted but not guarded. A cloak the color of old milk hung from her shoulders. She walked with the kind of straightness that comes from remembering every pair of eyes on you. Her face was pale and clean as an empty plate. A tall man with a burned face fell into step behind them, not bothering to pretend he did not belong to pain. The girl looked once at the river, only a flicker, and you would not see the grief in it unless grief knew you by name. The small figure with the basket of chopped roots kept her head bent and watched the floor rush past under the girl's shoes. There are two kinds of distances, the kind you cross with feet and the kind that a name cannot cross. She had learned both too early. She made herself look away. Night tucked itself into the joints of the keep. Torches licked stone and you could taste pitch on the heat. Certain doors sprang into importance. Men with soft hands stood taller. The kitchen kept its own tide going. Peel, scour, stir, carry. She made herself numb to hunger so she could feel movement in the stone. Cooks talk because someone has to, and a name caught on a skillet handle and was dragged her way. Lancel, the queen's cousin, running up and down like a nervous cat. They laughed when they said it, and laughter in a kitchen sits on fear's lap. The small figure tucked the name into her pouch with a loop of twine and a chipped button that had someday belonged to a different life. A cook's boy of 12 with a grin too wide for his face began to think this new silent scrap was a girl who would listen. He told her where the wines were kept and the trick of easing a cork without a sound. He told her that the queen had a taste for dark, rich, heavy bottles that smelled like old wood in summer, and that the man with the white cloak, no, not the big silent one with the pitted skin, the other one, the pretty one, had been seen swaying. He told it like gossip and she heard it like a map. When she finally found a corner and leaned her back against stone and let her hands be still, she counted the tasks she had completed without adding their names to her list. She had never been a good counter of coins, but names she counted the way you count breaths in the dark to keep the panic from eating you. She had once recited them each night, as if syllables could put chains on the bright faces that had taken her father from her. One of those faces wore mother's jewels and always smelled of something that had been burned. It was not magic that had brought her here. It was feet and cunning and a hunger that could not be fed except once. The coin in her pocket lay like a secret tongue. She had not spent it though she had needed to. She had conjured other coins instead, smaller, more forgettable. The heavy one, the one with the wrong man's face, slept and reminded her of a man who had smiled without warmth and taught her to move like smoke and death like a favor granted. She told herself she would use that coin another kind of day. For now, it was a story in her pocket. If she were caught, she could let a syllable fall and maybe doors would open where walls pretended to be. She did not listen for footsteps so much as she listened for the way stone breathed. There is a change a corridor makes when someone important is about to pass. Even mice feel it and hold their whiskers still. Late, after a rush of sloshed wine buckets and bread heels with more black than crumb, the change came. Someone had told a guard to move his boot and not scrape it. Someone else had stifled a cough in linen rather than in the throat. She slid into the shadow of the cold pantry where the sides of hams in winter hang like sleeping soldiers and waited with her eyes half closed, because pretending to sleep lets your other senses wake. They passed in a little troop, like geese with a fox behind. A small boy dressed too fine, his cloak neatly arranged, his mouth set like a prayer, and behind him the woman she had come for. It is possible to know a face by its outline in torchlight if you have thought of it every night for moons. She felt part of herself stand and part of herself sit. The two halves did not consult. That face was beautiful in the way a sword is beautiful. The hair was a pale banner that caught light and lied about softness. The mouth was still, but the eyes were busy, counting things not in the corridor. A gold pin at her shoulder was shaped like twin lions facing each other with the Irmot Sopeng. There were men around her, not as many as there would be on a fair day, and not all of them knew where to look. They moved toward the stairs that led deeper into the keep, toward the little fortress inside the fortress that had been made for queens who had learned that walls sometimes were not enough. She let them pass. She let the second rank pass. When the shuffle of boot leather on stone had thinned, she slipped out as the mice do, not scurrying, only appearing elsewhere. She did not follow the queen's party. There was a different route that ran parallel and touched theirs where the corridor narrowed and the ceiling dropped like a low sky. She had seen it hours before when carrying a basin too big for her to carry, and a woman with flour on her forearms had clucked at her to be careful of bowls and not of her bones. A servant learns the angles a noble's face forgets. She moved along that route with her breath soft as flour dust and the knife inside her jerkin like a promise under the skin. At the place where the passages kissed, a door had been left on the latch to hasten the important past some stupid snag in the stonework. She eased it and eased herself through until she was in a small square space that functioned as neither room nor passage, the kind of place castles breed like mushrooms in damp. Another door would open from the important corridor. She could hear their voices now, not words, just the rise and fall and the single note that belonged to that woman's throat. There was impatience in it and a kind of relish. She had practiced not hearing words since she had had to begin pretending she had none. There are many kinds of killing. She had learned the pantry kind at Harrenhal and the yard kind in the dark behind barns, and twice the kind that happens when someone thinks you cannot reach their throat and you do. The kind before her needed quiet more than speed. She set the knife in the meat of her palm. She set the rest of her on a shelf inside herself where she would not have to feel her own breath. The latch lifted and the space on the other side let in 3 voices and the light of 1 torch. The first voice belonged to a woman paid to be in rooms first and open soft things and please her mistress by taking the edge off the world. The second belonged to a man who thought bravery could be proven by volume. The third was a sibilant thread that might have been silk rubbing silk, and if it had words in it, those words were knives. She might have been 20 paces away. She might have been a span of a hand. In the half-light, a rustle of pale hair and heavy cloth slipped through the opening, and a hand lifted to bar the door while orders were given about beds and where to put the child. Children can be fat with sleep if they are allowed, and they can also be knives without hilts. She moved then, not as a strike, not as a leap, but as the way a shadow crosses a candle. The woman with the torch turned her face and saw nothing. The man with the too tight coral green cloak felt a wind that was not wind. The woman with the pale hair took one step before a small brown hand found her wrist above the gold pin, and the other found the hollow behind the jawbone where a pulse beats like a bird. It is a small place. It is a door for fingers. The knife went in under the angle of the jaw and tilted. The body's mind is slow, and her mouth made a sound that was neither word nor cry. There was, for an instant, surprise that was genuine, and Arya was old enough to recognize that even the proud do not think their throats can be unbuttoned like that. The torch dropped and rolled. The man in the green cloak began the syllable of a saint and ended it without teeth. She had jabbed with her fingers to the origins of sound. His momentary shock was a hand on her shoulder, and she turned with the twist a butcher uses to change an animal's footing. She did not mean to be cruel and was not. She put her knife in him because he caged the space and someone could have made a shout if he learned how to breathe again. The woman with the torch had seen now, truly seen, and her hand made the mistake of going to her mouth. In the next second, she might have done anything. Any might was dangerous. Arya stepped toward her and pressed the torch hand to the wall with a grip that had learned how fingers crush berries. "Drop it," she said in a voice that belonged to no child in that kitchen. The torch kissed the floor and licked the stone. There are ways to keep blood from singing on flagstones. She had brought a rag. She had brought the silence that follows lightning. The queen wasn't a queen anymore, only a body that had not decided which way to fall, hung against her for an instant with the weight of a tapestry. She stayed on her feet because her body had made a habit of it. The blood was at first warm rain, then it thought of being a river and learned to pour. Arya had to steer it a little with the rag so it would not shout. She listened for the change in the corridor beyond their cubed little room. Her heart tried to be a drum, but she set her mind upon it like a hand and said, "Quiet." The small boy, too heavy a cloak, careful hair, had gone on toward the inner door. They had tried to hurry him past the square. The woman whose hands she had pressed against stone now slid down them. She used her foot to nudge the fallen torch farther into the corner. Its little tongue was tasting dust and tired of it. The green-cloaked man made a small noise as if remembering his mother. She did not want to remember anyone's mother. She moved him with the convenient grace of fear, a jerk and a shove that set his shoulder to the angle where the wall would keep him from the light that breathed under the door. The bright hair in her hand carried a smell of sweet heavy wine and something burned and expensive. The face, emptied, looked younger. She looked for the thing under the face that would have been a girl once. She did not find it. It is possible that some childhoods end so early you cannot find them even with a torch. She took the brooch from the shoulder because it would be expected. She forgot to pity the woman who had worn it because pity is for times when there is not a river of men with steel within a mile of you. There is always a moment after you have done something that seemed a mountain when the valley shows you you are not finished. Someone might come. One scream would call a dozen. She had chosen this angle of corridors because the stone here was old and the mortar mean. She set the torch upright very carefully, at the door's foot to make the seams of it brighter and busier. If anyone looked, they would see the blush of light and think someone inside was waiting on someone else. She lifted the dead woman's hair with the tip of her knife and wiped it on the silk to take away the worst of the slick. She pinched the press of blood at the hollow she had opened the way you pinch a wineskin. She did not look at the eyes. She would see them when she slept. There was no medicine for that. When she slipped back into the pantry, she left the rag where the torch would find it. She took the pin and the knife and nothing else. She returned to being no one in particular, the small colorless thing that passes under elbows. In the kitchen there was a quarrel over flour. Someone slapped someone and laughter fell over the room like tossed water. She went to the sink and scrubbed her hands until her knuckles went pale. She held them still above the water to see if they would drip red. They did not. There were ways that blood remembered you, but sometimes it chose to keep its stories. If she had turned then and run, the story might have been nothing more than a body found inconveniently at a passage. The keep stirred, doors secured, searches done with zeal that would sleep by dawn. But she had learned that knives make noise long after you sheathe them. She needed the noise to be something else. So when Lancel came to the kitchen with his buttons skewed and his mouth too wet and asked for more wine because his lady required it, he said lady with reverence that did not sit on him easily. The boy with the too-wide grin took a bottle from the dark shelf and passed it to the small brown child because the small brown child was the one no one noticed until a thing was already completed. She carried that weight like a votive lamp. The neck of the bottle was slick. She walked as she had seen bearers walk in a temple, small, solemn, and careful not to catch anyone's eye. Lancel did not know her. He saw only the shape that meant his errand was ending. He took the wine and tossed her a half-coin he had not counted. "Hurry," he said, and had said it too often already, so that it no longer meant anything except someone else's fear running on his legs. He turned and she watched him go with the peculiar sense that the corridors had bent around him to make his path easier. That night was made of edges. When she stood still, she thought she could feel the keep canted seaward, as if all its stones leaned toward the Blackwater and listened. The river had become a person sly and counterfeit, a man who wears a dozen faces and asks you to pick which one you want to drown in. She found her corner again and let her breath slow. The brooch in her pocket bit her thigh. She slid it up under the hem of her jerkin where it would prick if she forgot it. For the first time since the skiff had nosed under the quay, she said the woman's name in her mind and then did not say it again. Names are meat for other minds to chew, and she needed all her meat for herself. The kitchen scraped down into the long hours. The cooks told each other stories about winters where soup had been made of bark and epics about geese taken at impossible angles with rocks. The cat leaped at a moth and missed it and pretended not to have leaped. Once, someone's song started and was strangled, maybe by the singer's own hand. She fell asleep with her head on her arm and woke with the crack of a ladle on the head of the boy with the too-wide grin as punishment for something he had not done. Dawn did not change the smell of the air. It was still metal and damp rope and fish scales, but it brought a churn of orders, that pottage up to the holdfast, those trenchers to the Tower of the Hand, those flasks to where a little king waited to be brave. A woman shouted for her. She went. The morning made everything look like itself. The queen was dead and did not yet know how to announce it. The corridor beyond the small square had been busy and then busier, and then a stricken hush went around the stone like a cold hand. The hush arrived in the kitchen late, as such things do, and when it arrived no one spoke for a moment, not even to pretend ignorance. Someone laughed on a wrong note and choked. Someone said, softly, "It's begun." And no one answered because begun could mean anything. The river, the siege, the dying, the work, the end of all ends. The boy with the grin turned his face toward a corner and wiped his eyes with the back of his wrist and said, "Smoke," to no one. The small brown child stood at the sink and cut her thumb very slightly on a sliver of bone in the water and watched the blood bead. It was clean and astonishingly red, and then it was a smudge under her nail. "Pots," the onion-wrist woman said, and she began to stack them as if they were the steps of a ladder up which she would climb toward a sky that might or might not still be there. It was not until the first messenger came to the kitchen, panting, his breath white as if it were winter, that the name arrived wrapped in orders. "The queen will not be in the holdfast." The queen, the word shredded on his teeth. The queen is to be known to be about her devotions. The queen is not to be discussed. The women nodded as if in agreement with the idea of a queen who was a prayer. Then, once he had gone, a WM. And with flour in the creases of her lips, said in the tone a mother uses to scold a reckless child, "They'll say it's Stannis's men. They'll say the river did it. They'll say anything with a mouth but not their own." In the Tower of the Hand had not yet been told. It was morning and he carried morning like a shield. He had the look of a man who has counted his enemies and decided to use sums instead of steal if the sums will reach. His humor was a lamp one did not expect to find lit. He had men to see and a chain to trust and a king to shepherd and a sister to. He stopped when the first whisper arrived. It came in a low voice from a man who would one day own 2 inns for his discretion but today owned nothing but sweat. The Hand took the words into himself and did not let them out of his mouth. He became, if possible, even smaller in space, as if rearranging his bones. He asked a question no one else thought to ask. "Who stands with the boy?" Then another, "Who saw?" Then the third, which made the messenger's eyes slide. How much wine? He nodded to himself as if confirming that rain was wet. He did not go to the little square where a torch had kissed dust and betrayed no other secrets. He did not need to. He sent 3 men to change the pattern of guards. He ordered someone to find the king's uncle and set his body between the boy and the river's noise. He told the boy's fool to be particularly funny and then stopped himself, because that was not a kindness. He sent for a certain sellsword and told him to do nothing spectacular, for once, and to stand so that his shadow lay in a convenient place in the yard where he could trip someone if someone needed tripping. Then, and only then, he allowed his face to know that the woman who had once been half his trouble and half his spine was lying with her throat split the way swine lie at slaughter. He had hated her in 100 different keys. He had loved her as you love a childhood that taught you to keep your hands closed. He stood with his hand on the cold sill of his window and let himself count the cost. If this had happened an hour later or a day earlier, if the thing in the river had not been the thing it was, if the boy did not look like a waxed icon of a king, he had seen cities fall and loved them anyway. He arranged his face and moved. Somewhere below, in a vault that had not wanted a queen and had received one, a man whose hair had turned the color of smoke before his heart did arrange the narrative with the care of a tailor fitting truth to a body. He told the first frightened lady who found words that this was clearly an accident, that the queen, nervous on the eve of battle, had stumbled on a candle, that the cut, which only looked like a wound because blood always tried to make itself beautiful, had been made by a fall against a hooked iron. Horrible, yes, but how many old hinges had bared their teeth in this keep? He said it gently, with hands that did not move. He said it with eyes that remembered where the rats ran and where to put cheese. If the lie did not sit well, it sat politely. Polite lies are the first to be devoured when panic gets its appetite. In the yard, a young king stood trembling and tried to be seen not to tremble. His hair had been brushed forward as if the wind would only ever come from behind. His armor did not look as if it had been made for him so much as for an idea of him. He lifted his chin at a moment chosen more by tutors than weather. The hound stood near him, tall and complete in his brokenness. The eye that turned toward the bay already narrowed against a brightness that had not yet spilled. At his nearer elbow stood a girl in milk-colored wool whose throat kept learning how to survive. She looked toward the keep once, as if she had felt a change in the air, a door closing with a softness that was worse than a slam. Then she looked away so that no one could follow her gaze like a path. The Red Priestess down in the city threw her head back and smiled at the sky, and if you saw her you might have thought she was welcoming a storm. The pyromancers moved like beetles in their green-stained robes, proud as poets of danger. Mummers in a square practiced a bit where death was fooled by a hat. A woman at a window made the sign her mother had told her would keep ships safe, and then made another sign that had nothing to do with gods. Men on the walls shouted at boats to keep together, as if shouting could tie them. Men in the cellars cursed softly as they lifted and carried and imagined flames. If fate were a loom, the shuttle was moving too fast to see and the threads were already tangled. In the kitchen, the small brown child gained a cup of broth by helping and won privacy by not being interesting. She took the cup to a corner and watched the steam and let her mind sit next to it. There was a tremor in the stone that did not come from feet, came from distance becoming near. She sipped the broth and tasted onion and thyme and the vinegar the cook had used to sharpen something dull. She thought of Winterfell's kitchens with their smoke black and honest, of her mother's hands making a cup warmer by being around it. She did not cry because the part of her that might have cried had learned to sit in the corner of her mind with her knife. When she finished the last sip, she turned the cup in her hands and set it down in a place where it would be taken without anyone looking for the person who had drunk from it. You cannot plan for the way a city decides to know something. Sometimes knowledge arrives like a trumpet. Sometimes it filters under doors as a smell. The Queen's death chose the second. Servants began to treat each other more carefully, as if fragile things were walking past. A man lowered his voice, and the man he was speaking to backed away a step as if sound itself might burn. A lady's maid held a linen to her lips without touching it. The child with the basket saw all of this and watched the edges where such caution tears, because it is at edges that openings appear. The first edge tore near the holdfast. A knight in white reached out to seize a fearful page by the sleeve, and the page swung around, elbowing the knight who let it happen because he was looking past him. And in the moment of that courtesy, a door that should have closed entirely was left ajar by the width of a finger. The small brown child was not near it, but understood doors the way other people understand weather. She made a circuit of the kitchen that took her past a pail and a stack of trenchers and a woman wrestling with dough, and the next time she slipped into a corridor, she took a turn into the womb and then a stare that liked to be quiet. She did not smile. Smiles are for after. In a room that had hidden itself behind a notion of piety, the queen lay with her hair arranged by hands that feared to be blamed for disrespect, and her face had gone to that calm that sometimes makes even violence appear to be sleep. The man with eyes like a dark cabinet looked at her, and then at the woman whose hands had arranged the hair, and murmured something that meant, "You have done all that can be done, and you will not go to the cells tonight." He had already begun to move his pieces. A decree about mourning, a decree about bravery, a word to a courier whose horse did not tire easily. He did not know yet who had made this cut. He would not waste time believing in ghosts. She needed to clip one thread more. The brooch would be found missing if no one thought to reorder the catalog of what queens wear. She took it from where it pricked her thigh and weighed it. Two lions looking at each other and seeing only themselves. She slid it into a crack in the mortar in the pantry. To carry a trophy is to invite a story to follow you. She did not want this story to know her scent. She touched it once as if finger across an eyelid, and then left it to belong to stone. Later, someone would find it. Or later, the stone would keep it forever. Stone knows how to hold secrets until moss eats the edges off. The day wore its courage like a borrowed coat. Men with the smell of horse on them came and went, and their hoofbeats in the yard arranged quiet and noise. At the walls, men found a way to humor and then let it go. The boy king stood and glowed and was a lantern made of wax. The hound watched the river for shapes that changed, and his mouth was a line you could cut yourself on. The girl in milk wool stood and said yes when she must and no when that would be worse. That was a skill, and she had learned it under a sky that never remembered to be kind. Toward noon the river flared, as if something under its skin had laughed. The first scream was not one scream. It was the city taking in breath and not knowing how to let it out. Fire moves in an old language. The people on the walls spoke newer ones. A man who had been a boy yesterday put his hand on the stone and felt heat move through it so fast that he believed a demon had rubbed itself against the world. The chain did what chains do: contain. The green did what sorcery does: betray the common notion of water. Boats came apart the way old arguments do when you finally stop pretending. Somewhere a man in green laughed and died for the pleasure of his own understanding. She did not go to the walls. Her work was lower. In the kitchen the heat doubled until it felt eager. The onion-wrist woman began to move with a slow economy that meant she was having to think past pain. The boy with the grin ran until the ladle cracked him again. People who had worn their fear small as a pin now wore it bold as a half-cloak. Messengers came and took and brought. Orders made loops around the flames as if learning a dance. The small brown child kept moving in the pattern she had made herself. Carry, look down, learn, disappear. She could feel the picture in the air shifting, as if a painter had started with water and then changed his mind to fire. That meant there would be edges. She did not know which edge would give first. On the far side of the river, an army watched what the river did to itself and learned about arrogance. Men who had spent nights sharpening their hearts for battle found their hands empty of the right tools. But some of them liked fighting better than living, and even sorcery does not salt out that liking entirely. They pushed their boats where they could and took ladders where water would let them and leaned them against a city that had made itself into a kiln. The first men up the ladders have always been certain of themselves and wrong. The second men are more complicated. The third men do not think of their names at all. She did not see this, but she felt it in the way the keep tensed its spine. The hand moved on his own tracks. Some led him to walls where he could look and make his mouth do the things mouths must do to pull other men into sense. Some led him to stairs where he dare not stumble. Some led him, finally, reluctantly, to a room where a boy held a sword the way a prayer holds last hope. The boy's mouth already knew how to sneer and didn't know that sneer broke if held too long. "You will stand where I tell you," the hand said, and made it a joke and a threat and a kindness. The boy snarled and then remembered a story someone had told him about a king who had rode against fear and won, and he wanted that story. The hand did not look toward the square where a torch had licked dirt. He had a battle to wage where words and fire had to live in the same sentence. In a different corner of that complicated hive, the man with eyes like a cabinet slid a message into a bird's leg and told himself that while men chopped each other into reasons, he would make sure that no reason went to waste. He considered the queen and felt neither grief nor relief, only the reconfiguration of a table. He folded his hands in his sleeves and thought about a girl from the north who had walked through a city like a ghost once and whose eyes had eaten everything they saw. He did not know that girl had come back with less of a ghost and more of a knife. He suspected the world had a way of making such girls. In the kitchen, the small brown child poured water and took a saucepan off a hotter flame and cut bread that tried to fall apart and never did. She watched the door. There are moments when a door becomes the only thing in a room. It grows a halo. People turn toward it as if it breathes. She kept her gaze bent and still felt it growing. The boy with the wide grin reached for water at the same moment. Their hands touched. He blinked. She did not. A messenger came through then, one hand on the doorframe as if the keep had started moving and he needed to steady it. "To the holdfast," he said, and though he meant the food, not the girl with the milk-wool cloak, Arya's feet had already started moving. Carrying, always carrying. That is how you pass uncounted through men with spears who do not want to move aside. A platter in your hands makes a space even armor must respect. She followed others with their burdens and turned where they turned. The holdfast had its own air. Older, thicker. The smell of centuries of women praying and cursing and giving birth and telling children to hush. The corridor that led into it made itself narrow to teach you humility. Within the broad, low chamber, women and children sat with their backs against stone and took the weight of fear in their laps as if it were a cat that would not settle. Light walked across their faces and left. A septa murmured. Someone tried to convince a child that dried apple was honey. The girl in milk, in a place near the front, had her hands folded so tightly the knuckles were new moons. Her face was as empty as a well-swept hearth. Her eyes, though, kept counting. She had learned to count who looked at her and who looked away and who did not dare. The small brown child with the platter set it where it needed to go and looked down. If she had reached then, if she had let her hands do what her feet wanted, they would have told each other a name. Perhaps the world would have altered. Perhaps it would have collapsed. But even in a room of women, the air can be rimmed with steel. A white cloak had found its way there and stood like part of a pillar. He would not let two girls become their old selves, not today. On the way out, she passed a woman standing alone at the back near the bundles of rushes kept for scrubbing. The woman looked wrong by being right. Composed, hair neat, hands folded, dress unwrinkled. She was not of the kitchen and not of the nursery. She had a face you might not remember. That made Arya remember it. As they passed each other, the woman looked down, as if mildly chastened by the sight of labor. Arya had learned that some faces were walls. She brushed near enough to feel the woman's sleeve, and the woman did not flinch. After that, Arya had her. If a thing does not move when touched, it is either dead or certain of itself. She kept the woman in the corner of her eye. Later, when a certain man went looking and found nothing in the pantry but a rag of the wrong color and a smell of smoke that clung more than it should, when the word accident had set down roots and the word murder had been kicked like a stray dog 3 times and sent away to whimper behind the stables, when smoke on the river had begun to make the light in the keep indecisive, the woman with the unwrinkled dress would move through a door only certain men knew and carry with her a message that was not a message, only a look, a walk, and a slight tilt of the head that would mean that somewhere a table was being laid for an unexpected guest. Arya did not know this, but she would know the walk before the day was out. On the walls, the green fire danced like something a child's cruel imagination had invented. It leaped and clung and sang in a high glassy voice that could not be shut out by hands or prayer. A boat bucked and gave up a boy whose cheeks were still round. He came through the fire and was not the same thing on the other side. The hound's horse shied, and he made it not matter, and then it mattered anyway. He pulled the boy king back from a place where Flame wanted to shake hands or snap. Different is hard to say. The boy looked up at the man whose face had been burned for him by the world before he was born and learned a new lesson about what is awful. He could not tell whether it was the face or the fire or his own heart. The hand found the place where he would earn his scars and did not let himself admire how perfect a plan is until it meets the part of the world that refuses to be perfect. He shouted something clever, necessary, practical, and a man heard it and died. Another man heard it and lived. That is how orders do. He smelled the sweetness and the vinegar of the green, and beneath that the brass-rich stink of blood under mail. He held an axe with more confidence than anyone who knew him would have guessed, and when he felt the bite of it meet bone, he did not vomit. He told himself that there would be time later to be a different man. He was lying. Later is for debts. The girl in milk wool in the holdfast closed her eyes once, briefly, and saw a corridor she had skipped along when she was smaller and more foolish and thought red was a pretty color that loved her. She opened them again and kept them open. A woman began to sing in a voice that swayed. The song might have been about harvest. It might have been about a knight with a bad habit of dying. No one listened for the words. They listened for the fact that something was being done that was not fear. In the kitchen, a cook who had forgotten to be cruel put a hand on the shoulder of the boy with the grin and allowed it to rest there. The boy did not cry, but something relaxed in the set of his mouth. The small brown child came to stand at the edge of the door. ND listened for a footstep that meant something different than what all the other footsteps meant. She did not know precisely what she was waiting for until she heard it. The gait of someone who did not hurry, through a world in the act of running. She followed that walk up a stair she had not yet met. It led where smoke had drifted as if it recognized a friend. She found the woman with the unwrinkled dress in a corridor of niches where old, broken statuary peered from shadows like embarrassed ghosts. The woman had taken off her gloves. Her hands were very clean. In the low light, her face would have been pretty in a town where prettiness matters. Here, it looked like a calculated courtesy. The woman paused by a small door that most would have thought led to a closet. She reached for the latch without looking around her. Arya made a decision without consulting anything but her feet. She crossed the corridor quickly, her movement disguised by the sudden roar from outside as a section of river went from green to gold, which is a thing it can do for moments before it remembers its darkest self. "Do you need?" she asked, in the voice of the girl from the kitchens who begged to be useful, and the woman looked down at her as if a fly had spoken. "Not now," she said in a voice that had been taught not to be cruel and was crueler for it, and opened the door and slipped through and closed it behind her. Arya did not press her eye to the crack at once. Instead, she listened to the nearly inaudible adjustment the wall made to having been opened. On the other side, a second set of footsteps began. Not the woman's, heavier, thoughtful. Arya counted to 5, slowly, and then pressed her cheek near the seam of the door and saw darkness. It was a passage. All castles grow tunnels like underground vines, each with its own appetite. She pulled back and stood still, as if stillness were a cloak. She did not feel triumphant. Victory had a taste like iron today, and whatever satisfaction might be found in it was soaked and hidden. She walked back toward the kitchen because that was the safest direction to be seen moving, and in the corner of her mind she placed the little door on a map she was making of the keep, a map that had already changed because the queen was not on it anymore. She thought of the boy king's small careful steps and of the woman arranging dead hair and of a man whose wit was a rope that kept men from drowning and of a burned face that feared flames and still stood near them. She thought of her sister and of a room where women clutched each other in ways that made them seem like one body. Under her thoughts, a quieter thought moved. What next? Knives are not plans. They are punctuation. She knew that someone would be blamed. Blame is always hung on the nearest peg that seems strong enough to hold it. She knew that rooms would be searched and stories drilled into those whose voices might betray. She knew that a kitchen child was a good shape to carry questions to. Few want answers from such mouths, but the words go in and make their nest. She would need to shrink, and then to grow, and then to vanish, and then to take a form that would get her close to someone whose face had once sat beside the face she had unmade. Outside, men sang to drown out fire. Inside, a city began to recalibrate itself around an absence. There are queens who remain queens when they are dead. This one would make a longer noise under the stone than some would prefer. The courtiers who had prided themselves on understanding the weather of a woman's favor would now sip at the wind and pretend to taste nothing. The king would be a boy after in new and dangerous ways. The hand would find the city heavier. All its sleights hung on his belt like weights. The clever ones would write new ledgers and scratch out names and write others in their places, and some ink would be blood. The silent ones would do as they had always done. Carry and sweep and see everything. She went back to the sink and scrubbed the same pot she had scrubbed twice and ignored. The onion-wrist woman came and took it from her and said without malice, "Another." Because work is how kitchens pray. She fetched another pot. She stood as if the stone were teaching her to stand. She let the steam rise and felt it right on her skin. The coin in her pocket was heavier, though it had not changed. She thought of what it might buy: passage, a ship, a teacher, a death. She would not spend it for any of those yet. Its weight reminded her both that there are doors you cannot find without a word, and that words, once said, attract listeners. Somewhere above, a second bell joined the first, and their combined voices were like two knives asked to sing a duet. The hound cursed and stayed. The hand raised his arm, and a gate opened, and an ambush built in the mind of a patient father arrived not too soon. The red priestess on her hill lifted both hands to an absent son. The girl in milk wool heard the bell and closed her eyes for the third time that day, and when she opened them a new line had appeared at the corner of her mouth, from the strain of holding it quiet. Toward evening, when the light tried to decide whether to leave, men came into the kitchen and found themselves unable to judge hunger or thirst. Their armor had scorched places. Their lips were cracked. The cooks who had once been cruel put bowls in hands without demanding to hear a thank you. Just one bowl, just one sip. Could the queen? The question shied away from their mouths, reared, and fled. The small brown child slipped past them with a bundle of cloth that could be any cloth in the world. In it the stolen torch rag. In it a length of coarse thread. In it a thought she could not yet name. She took that bundle not toward the trash pit as a cook would, but toward the courtyard where a certain sellsword might be standing in such a way that his shadow could still do as told. She saw him now, not drinking, for once, and not making an easy joke. His eyes came down to her level because you learn to survive by seeing everything of any size. She watched him watch her not because she wanted anything from him, only because she was counting the men in this keep whose minds were cogs built for gears and whose loyalties ran like rivers that could be diverted if you set enough stone in their beds. He was part of the machine that would fight the river and win this day. After, he would return to his prices. He might look for a lost brooch. He might care for a half instant for a boy with too wide a grin who should not be beaten as much as he is. He might trip a man at the right moment because the hand had asked him to. And she might press a foot to the smallest edge of his shadow and let it propel her where she must go next. She moved on. The yard's dust was trampled into darker dust. At the far wall, where old ivy had once tried to climb stone and been scrubbed away by someone offended by such attempts, a seam showed where the lime had been mixed too thin. She placed the torch rag into the seam and pushed with her smallest finger until it disappeared. If they came to search for rags, and they would not, let them find it baked dry and innocent, a kitchen maid's mistake, the sort of thing scullions did all the time. A body was louder than a rag. Loud things drown out whispers. She had learned that too early too. She returned to the kitchen, where the cat had caught its moth after all and was dealing with it with the careful efficiency of disdain. She reached for the bowl the onion-wrist woman had placed at hand. "Eat," the woman said in a voice that had the weariness of a promise kept. She spooned stew into her mouth and tasted, beneath the char at the edge of the pot, something like triumph, only mixed with ash. The first bite was too hot. She burned her tongue and her eyes watered and she swallowed. "Good," she said, and it was not a lie. By night's edge the battle sang less loudly. Men breathed and remembered they were men. not wood thrown on a fire. The green calmed. The chain was a secret that had done its work and would not mind being talked of later. The boy king would sleep uneasily, because some parts of yourself only fall asleep after other parts have argued them down. The hand would sit with a cup he would not drink and try to make his mouth remember laughter long enough to use it again. The woman with the unwrinkled dress would pass under a lintel with two men who never looked at each other and carry out of the keep a message only the night could read. And the queen, who was no longer queen, would lie under a cloth and be a story that would breed more stories, because stories feed on what cannot be answered yet. The small brown child cleared bowls and stacked trencher boards and rinsed and kept rinsing long after the water had gone grim, and then she slept with her head against a warm stone shelf for an hour. When she woke, the cat was on the shelf too, its body a warm weight at her hip, and she would have sworn it had placed itself there on purpose to keep her heart from running off without her. She stared at the dark above her and listened to the keep breathing. She heard the change come again that meant someone heavy and important was moving. But this time, for once, it did not matter to her. She had put a small cut in a large animal. The creature would run for a while before it noticed how deep the wound went. In the morning, the city would begin to count. Survivors, losses, ships, barrels, arrows, oaths broken, oaths kept. It would speak of heroes and cowards. It would make clever men important and foolish men more foolish. It would whisper about a queen and then announce lies about her. The coin in her pocket would become heavier again, and she would consider spending it and would not. There was a road north, always. There were also other doors in this city that she had only begun to learn. No one had seen the small brown child slide the knife back into her hem and knot it there with a thread the color of old straw. No one knew her face well enough to dream of it. There is power in that. She stood, stretched her back, picked up a bowl bigger than her stomach and held it with both hands until it hid her like a shield, and walked back into the heart of the keep as if she belonged to its beating.